Hello everyone. Welcome to our third knowledge clip, which is going to be focusing on the theoretical framework of your moral limits of the market writing assignment. So let's go ahead and get started, just with some general information firstly about your theoretical framework. So in terms of the word count, I would recommend that the theoretical framework takes up quite a large section of your writing assignment, since this is where you are really diving into the literature, going to describe some key concepts and terms, and also do a teeny bit of analysis as well, since you obviously want to have a general idea of how this relates back to your research question prior to your final conclusion section. So the general goal of the theoretical framework is to, of course, describe relevant information and literature that helps you answer your central or research question. And that's something that you have already introduced in your introduction. What is really important in the theoretical framework is that it has or identifies those core characteristics and also key concepts that are, again, relevant to the particular market and frameworks that you've chosen in your moral limits writing assignment. In general, the theoretical framework is to provide background into how the factors have been analyzed in previous literature, and in terms of developing how you're going to evaluate your research question, that is something that is developed in your theoretical framework, slightly evaluated as well in a sort of mini analysis, and then really solidified in the conclusion statement or in your conclusion section. So just to recap a little bit, your assignment is, again, describing or wanting to dive into how a particular market essentially has an impact on behavior and also incentives overall. And you want to also sort of evaluate which ethical framework or frameworks should be considered to evaluate this behavior in the market of your choice. So really here you are given quite a lot of liberty in terms of deciding the market, the framework, and so on. But some key things to note for the theoretical framework is that you should, again, define those key concepts for your research question. You also should define noxious market and ethical pluralism, and of course, define and describe other concepts that you have chosen depending on what section or what factor, what market you're focusing on based on your research question that you established in the introduction. And you really want to focus on the effects of incentive and moral behavior. You want to, of course, focus on those causal relationships. So how does the literature support or to what extent does literature have an impact on your analysis of your research question? So getting into the theoretical framework a little bit more in terms of the key structure points that I would recommend, or the key parts that I would recommend looking into, which is firstly the background, and then the second is relevant criteria and sort of initial mini analysis, since we don't have a proper analysis section here in the paper. So firstly is the background. So we're really trying to be descriptive, so explain the what, and explanatory and explain the how. So again, as a reminder, you should describe and define noxious markets and ethical pluralism. So this is explicitly said in your course outline, so make sure to cover those. And of course, any other relevant concepts or market ethical framework and so on that you've decided to explore depending on your research question. Some relevant topics that you could explore with the literature or kind of subtopics, and definitely I would use AI here as an extra tool. So some things that you could look into are principles of the free market, including supply and demand, elasticity, international trade, obviously, again, going back to noxious markets. Also, the relationship between incentives and moral behavior. So how can incentives actually have an impact on our moral behavior? Ethical pluralism, definitions in that, and in terms of what are some aspects that are relevant to decide whether a market practice is morally legitimate. And of course, use the literature that you have discussed in class. I'm sure that they've also asked you to use a little bit of AI in relation to your literature to group in common themes. So I would definitely also use that to your advantage as well. And the main thing here is that, especially for the relevant topics you could explore, again, make sure to pick a select few of these to actually explore more in depth rather than picking a lot and really covering them only on the surface level. So make sure that they are, thoroughly examined with the literature, and obviously using some general help and tools with the AI that you're allowed to use. And of course, that they should relate to your central question. So then the second main part of your theoretical framework is the relevant criteria and analysis. So in your relevant criteria, you essentially want to reflect on your particular chosen market or incentive and which ethical framework should be considered to evaluate the behavior in the market of your choice. So again, focus on those incentives and markets depending on what your research question is specifically about. And in terms of your criteria, what I mean by criteria are ways to measure and analyze your chosen market, and ways that you can analyze basically the extent to which your research question is valid. So you can develop your research criteria, your relevant criteria, by again looking at relevant ethical frameworks, looking through your literature for common themes and arguments, using AI to help you categorize criteria into certain topics. So once you've sort of set the scene and set the background, then you want to introduce concepts that are actually going to help you grade your research question on the extent to which it's legitimate, it's valid, whatever. And same with the topics that I mentioned before. Make sure to narrow down these criteria to a select few that you can actually explore and that are backed up enough by the literature. So you need to be able to explain them with quite a bit of evidence, either using the articles from the course itself or also external journals and academic pieces of literature. Then moving on a little bit from the relevant criteria and analysis section just for the criteria part, going into a little bit of the analysis. So again, you want to reflect on your chosen research question and decide on some relevant criteria to actually grade your research question. And based on this criteria, then you can perform sort of a brief analysis. So since we don't have a formal analysis section in the writing assignment, you kind of need to combine the analysis into your theoretical framework and also in your conclusion. At least that's how I would recommend you group in or you structure your paper. So based on your criteria, then you can basically relate it back to your central question and use the criteria then to evaluate the extent to which your research question is valid or not. So to what extent is a particular market or incentive morally legitimate based on this ethical framework? Then that's something you can also explore a bit in your theoretical framework. And what I do want to mention here is I would recommend that you solidify these arguments using the literature and the criteria that you've established in your theoretical framework, and you essentially reiterate and maybe explore these findings further in your conclusion. So again, you kind of split your analysis into two sections. Again, some suggestions here on how to find your literature for the first two parts. So looking for common themes, using AI to decide how to organize these common cases. And then you can also, of course, use that to your advantage. One thing that I would note is to, think of your criteria as sort of grading rubric categories. So again, your criteria should serve as something to help you analyze your research question. And again, explain or grade the extent to which this research question is valid. In terms of the actual paragraph structure that I would recommend, this is taken a bit from the analysis section recommendation that I had last year when I made a knowledge clip, but I think probably it's going to be the most relevant for you here in terms of your theoretical framework structure instead, since again, there's no proper analysis section. So per paragraph, what I would recommend is to order your relevant concepts and of course your criteria in order of importance. So what concepts or topics are most important in evaluating your central question. So maybe you want to focus on defining the main concepts, and maybe you find that noxious markets is something that is particularly fruitful in literature relating to your research question, rather than fairness, transparency, a certain ethical framework, and so on. So I would order them in terms of importance. And in terms of the actual logical flow, in the initial paragraph, again, this is where you're going to describe and define and set the background as in the first main part of your theoretical framework. And then in the second part where you're establishing your relevant criteria and analysis, that's where you get into each section, which is focused on the criteria, and then getting into a little bit of a mini analysis using that criteria. So per subtopic or per section of criteria / evidence, you need to make sure that you connect it regularly to your central question. So I would find or recommend finding first evidence validating the research question based on your defined criteria, and then introducing maybe some counter literature or some caveats for your research question or the validity of your research question, and then reiterate then your final findings regarding your central question, and sort of refute the counter literature or give a bit more context into the extent to which your central question is valid. So that's how I'd recommend framing the paragraph structure for the theoretical framework. So again, it's sort of a pseudo literature review / analysis section, which is a bit unique. And of course, if your tutorial tutor has a different suggestion here in terms of the structure, go with that. But this is how I would go about it to make sure you still have a quite structured flow to your essay. But yeah, that's going to wrap up today's knowledge clip regarding the theoretical framework. As always, as I mentioned, remember to listen to your UvA tutor first and foremost. And the final video about the conclusion section will also be uploaded soon, probably a few days before your final deadline as well. So yeah, wishing you the best of luck, and yeah, I'll see you in the next knowledge clip.